Hello and welcome to another episode of Five Alarm Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green. Happy to be back with you and happy to have you with us. If you're watching us on our video through our YouTube channel at 5-Alarm Task Force Corp, we're glad to have you. I hope you subscribe and make sure you hit that little bell so you'll notify every time we have a new post up there. If you're listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms, we're glad to have you as always. And for me, it's very good to be back. We've been out for a little over a week as we celebrate the arrival of our first grandchild, a little boy named Amiel Hudson. And we welcomed him into the family and gave him his name this past Sunday. And I'll tell you, it's amazing to be a grandfather. Everyone told me, my older brother told me about it, and friends have told me about it. But until you hit that moment, there's nothing like it until you see that baby for the first time and you hold him in your arms. And that's amazing. So we're glad to be back. And I've been trying to get this guest on our show today for a couple of months, and he was willing. Then he got time out, and then I was sick and I couldn't do it. And we finally put it together. And I'm pleased to welcome Chief John Vance to our show. And let me tell you a little bit about Chief Vance. Most of you probably know him from bshifter.com. But here's a little of his bio. The chief started as a fire explorer in 1982 and has been involved in the fire service or municipal services ever since. He has been the fire chief of the Minnetonka, Minnesota Fire Department since August of 2013. Oh, so you know what I went through when I was living in Syracuse. Prior to that, nearly 12 years as a chief officer with the Harris Township Fire Department and the Clay Fire Territory in South Bend, Indiana. He holds a bachelor's degree in fire service management from Southern Illinois University, a certificate in executive management from the University of Notre Dame, and is an accredited chief officer from the Center for Public Safety Excellence. The chief has been a BLUE Card Lead Instructor since its inception in 2008 and leads by the mantra, now listen to this please, be safe, be effective, and be nice. Chief, welcome to Five Alarm Task Force. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Steve, thanks for having me here, and it's good to see you. Long-time listener, first-time guest, so it's really good to be here, and I appreciate those kind words, and congratulations on the grandchild, too. I'm very happy for you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you know, if you know the chief from B Shifter, you know that one of his great aims in his fire service life is the care of firefighters, the protection of firefighters, teaching firefighters how to be better firefighters, how to be safer firefighters, and how to be nicer firefighters. Just before we came on the air, we talked briefly about the concept of that mantra as opposed to what we see too often today on social media. And so we hope that from this podcast, besides learning about blue card work and be learning about tactics and maybe even learning why sometimes we fail and what leaders can do about that. We hope one of the best takeaways you'll have from this podcast is learning that you can do this job that we all love and you can still be nice while doing it. So Chief, I think as we discussed before we came on the air, let's talk about blue card training. And since you've been a part of it since its inception, you've seen its strengths. You've seen maybe a couple of foibles here and there that we've learned from and that we've improved on. So let's start with that, please.
Well, and I want to mention too,
Sure.
Being nice all goes back to Alan Brunacini, which I was fortunate enough to study under his tutelage and learn what it was like to be a leader and a fire chief and what a good fire chief does. And we said it at his memorial service in 2017. Being nice doesn't mean being a pushover.
Right.
And as you alluded to, Steve, it means talking to the people that we might have an issue with rather than hiding behind a keyboard or talking behind their back or what, we're going to deal with the issue. That's part of being nice. And so often what we see, not only, we see it throughout the world now,
Right.
with social media and everything else, is it's a lot easier to either hide in the shadows and throw daggers at people and not directly talk to them about something, or and then you treat them different and whatever else. So being nice, I mean, if you go to any member of my department, they'll be able to say that's one of the expectations. is being nice, being safe, and being effective. So, but I give that all up to Bruno, because he was the one who helped form that. And the other thing is, it's not that complicated, right?
Right.
We have a tendency, not only in the fire service, but in government in general. And I think a lot of times our folks forget they work for the government, but the government in general overcomplicates things. And our job isn't really that complicated. If I can deliver an adequate amount of personnel and equipment and manage them well and take care of them, they're going to take care of your problem, right?
Right.
And I don't need to put in all kinds of, different acronyms and management systems and Six Sigmas and everything else, because if they can keep focused on their mission, and they do it in a way that not only protects themselves, but they're being kind to one another. And let's face it, most firefighters are kind people. That's the reason we get into this. They're gonna do well for themselves. So it's been a great journey, and I'm really fortunate to have been with Bruno. So going back to the question about Blue Card. Like yourself, being in the fire service back in the 80s, I used to go to fire scenes, and this is no mark against the folks that I used to work for. I had some tremendous fire chiefs and some tremendous teachers in the fire service early on, but fire scenes were just chaotic. There was a lot of screaming and yelling and freelancing, and really, it was whoever could get to the truck first and pull the line as the person who was on the nozzle, and it was very aggressive. And for a while, we thought every working fire also came with a free ambulance ride, because there was some danger to that. So it was very out of balance. And I was trying to figure out a way, and I've been a fire chief now for almost 20 years. When I became a chief, how do we teach command? And, I looked at Alan Brunacini's command book, Fire Command. It's on its second edition, getting ready for a third. I looked at Skip Coleman, which I thought that was a fantastic book. Reading anything I can from Frank Brannigan. You look at all the godfathers of our business,
right?
But trying to put that together into a coherent class was almost impossible for me, as somebody who also had a day job. So, I was always struggling with trying to teach Fire Command starting in 2002. And then come to find out, the Fire Command that Chief put together was really meant to be a 1 semester long junior college class. So I was kind of doing it wrong anyway when it came to looking at that. So once this opportunity came up, and going back to 2004, Fire Chief used to have a Fire Incident Command Symposium that the Phoenix Fire Department co-sponsored. And we went to that and saw their command training center. And we were like, Shazam, this is going to get us to where we need to be. So I was with Tim Schabel, he's the fire chief at Clay Fire Territory now. And we were on the airplane, and he drew up on a napkin by the time we landed back in South Bend what our command training center would look like, how it would be laid out. He secured a grant, and we got it built within a year. But once we had it built, now we need curriculum, right? And part of the thing that we liked about fire command training in Phoenix and what they were doing at their command training center is it was based on recognition prime decision making. So you see it on the computer, and at 3:00 in the morning, when you have to access that file in your head, you say to yourself, okay, I've seen this before, I made this decision before, and it makes that decision making that much easier. So that was kind of the reason for getting into this. On the flip side, it takes about 90 hours to create one command simulation. So it's extremely manpower intensive to create all of that. So, fast forward to 2006, Chief Brunacini retired. They started working on this Blue Card stuff, and we kicked it off in 2008. And I was fortunate enough that Clay Fire was the home for that for a few years. And we did all the first command training classes there. So I really got to be on the ground floor of starting it off. And I can tell you this, from those days of screaming and yelling and freelancing and injuries and unpredictable fire scenes, I can tell you today, fire scenes are managed safer. They're better. It's a better outcome for our customers, the people that we serve.
Sure.
And the best thing is it allows us to be sensibly aggressive. And one of the things that we hear criticism sometimes of Blue Card is, and I'm not going to use the term, but it's the wussification of the fire service. There's a national conference person that goes out and says that about Blue Card. Number one, they're not trained in Blue Card, so they're not really, I think, 100% familiar with what it is. And I would argue it's actually made our department more aggressive because we have a water on the fire mentality. We've set up our trucks so that our cross lays and hose loads and nozzles and pumper training is all focused on getting water on the fire quickly. And I'm sure, Steve, you've seen these YouTube videos that go on for 4 or 5 minutes without companies getting water on the fire, and I pray that doesn't happen here. So, that's where we start. Rescue is still very much a part of it. I mean, we're not ignoring victims. We're just saying if we get water on the fire, it's going to make it better for the victims and better for the firefighters that go inside to fight the fire. So that's kind of how I ended up with Blue Card and being so involved in it. And every week goes by and we're training more and more trainers. We just got into the Worcester Fire Department, and that's just been huge, because we consider it an honor to be with them. I know they've had multiple line of duty deaths in the last 20 years, and they're looking to try to
Worcester, Mass.
Yes,
I actually grew up in the next big town next to Worcester in Framingham, so I was very well familiar with the community because I had my dad drive us there like once a month because of a little big general store they had there, and it was great as a kid to go there, and it was a wonderful city to visit in those days. And I guess it was 1999 where the Worcester became a national point for the fire service with the tragic loss of our 6 brothers that night in December.
And one of the things that we see out of that tragedy, and they're great firefighters, great people. And there was some heroics that night, not only in trying to rescue the firefighters that were down inside that cold storage building, but Chief McAmee, who stood firm at the door and said nobody else goes in. And if it hadn't been for him, which he took a lot of heat for that.
Oh, sure
I mean, that was a tough position for him to take, but him being a chief officer on the outside had to make a decision. It's like, are we going to lose any more firefighters tonight? And he took his position, and he saved lives. And that's that says it all right there. So yeah, we're honored to be there and continuing to grow.
That's wonderful. And I think that, again, we talked about the fact that one of the most important aspects of being a firefighter today is your need to always be willing to be a student and be willing to learn. No matter what rank you attend, no matter how many certificates and courses you take, if you're not open to, number one, learning more, and then sharing what you learn with others, then keeping it to yourself is not going to help your department. It's because we know that not everybody can get to a conference, whether it's a national conference or regional. Maybe the local one's a little bit easier, but if you are lucky enough to go to a major conference, a regional conference, and you get some great classes in there and great hands-on training, you should feel obligated to come back to your home department and say, hey, I know you guys weren't able to make it, but let me show you what we learned. Let me show you some stuff on paper, and then maybe we can work something out with the chief, and we'll work, or the officers, and we'll get something to do hands-on, and I'll show you what we learned at the conference. When you do that, you raise yourself up to another level of being a member of that department, because you might not be the certified instructor in charge for that department, but you're willing to share what you've learned from another instructor that you think could help your department based on your experience there. And that's the most important thing as a trait, whether they learn today from this podcast or from any of the other couple of dozen great podcasts out there for the fire service, the conferences, etc. We know that we have Expo coming up in the fall. We have FDIC already coming up, planned for 2022 already. These are great conferences, and if you have the ability to go there, go and be a sponge, soak it all up, and then bring that and wring yourself out and share with your colleagues, because you're going to make your department better, stronger, and probably maybe even safer by sharing that knowledge with them.
So many things what we do is perishable. Those skills that we have are perishable. So our basic skills, moving water, forcible entry, extrication, all the patient care stuff we do, those are all perishable skills, and we need to work on them continually. And I think whether you're the most senior person on the fire department or the fire chief or whatever, every day is a training day. I mean, thank you, Billy G, for giving that to us. You know, I believe in that. I've preached that since day one. I learn something new every day. I've been doing this for 30 years now. Every day I'm learning something new. I went to training last night, learned something new. And for the folks out there that think it's one and done, and you come across that particularly with some members of the younger generation, not all of them, but they think, oh, I did that once. I had a 19-year-old member one time when I handed him an extrication tool. It's like, okay, you know, go ahead and make a cut. Oh, I did that last time. So what, you did it like one other time, man. Come on, you know, cut the door. So I think that we need to encourage that. And as chief officers and company officers, we need to model that behavior, because this job is bigger than all of us. And to think that you have it all figured out is the day that you should retire from the job, because we don't have it all figured out. And, you know, one thing that Bruno used to say is we must always be fixing ourselves. So, you know, for continuous improvement, every single day is another opportunity to learn, put those skills to use, refine the skills, maybe come up with a new policy or whatever it is, and then keep doing it over and over again. I say 1% better every day. If I can do 1% better every day, I'm making some progress. I know, you know, change is oftentimes hard in the fire service. So to push 25% progress on one day sometimes can be a little bit challenging as a chief, but if we can just put that steady pressure on and keep pushing our departments forward, our people forward, and lead from the front and show them that every day is an opportunity to learn, our folks are going to be better off, and they're going to be safer, and they're going to be able to, you know, once that air brake goes on and we get off that truck, Mrs. Smith expects us to get off and fix their problem. They don't care if we're volunteer, part paid, full-time, you know, what college John Vance went to. None of that matters.
Right.
What matters to them is being able to get off that truck and fix their problem. So how skilled are you to do that? And that's my whole question for our folks all the time is, you know, on their worst day, are we going to make it better or make it worse? And we can see tons of examples out there where fire departments arrived on a scene and they actually made it worse. Mm-hmm. They forced entry before there was water in the line. So they completed this thing called the fire tetrahedron. I had a retired firefighter, not from my department, but he was a passerby at a fire that we had, and was well involved in the back of the dwelling. And he thought he was doing the right thing. He got there and kicked open the door for us. So all that did was it drew the fire. By the time, and I have a police body camera because the cops were there before we were, there was no fire in the front of the house. By the time our battalion chief got there, fire's blown out of the front of the house because in about 30 seconds, he completed the fire tetrahedron for the front of that dwelling. So, right. You know, just those actions alone, you know, you look at how many times fire departments have shut off sprinkler systems after the fire is, you know, supposed to be suppressed, but we're not 100% sure, but the sprinkler system shut off to stop water damage, and working in cold smoke is really tough. We all know that. But the fire builds again, and suddenly it overruns the sprinkler system because we weren't monitoring it correctly, or we weren't really doing very good with overhaul or anything else. So these are all examples of us being able to do better every single day.
Right. So, and I'm glad you brought up the point that everything we're talking about today has nothing to do with whether you get a paycheck as a firefighter or you're a volunteer or part pay. This is about who we are in the job that we do. And if we dedicate ourselves, whether we're in a career department or volunteer department, wildland, part pay, we want to do the best that we can do to service our community. That's why we joined. That's why we took this position. We want to help our community. And as we said, sometimes we have the influences outside, like you and I both talked about. The show Emergency was a big influence for me when, not that I planned on being a firefighter, it just so happened when I relocated, there was a volunteer department down the street from our apartment. And that led me to that path. But I watched that show, every episode, I've read every book written about it, because it had such a strong influence on me. And I saw, even with the Hollywood drama that they added, the dedication of LA County Fire Department to create this program, I think second only to a small department in the mountains of North Carolina that actually had, I think, the first official paramedic program. But they dedicated themselves to the point where they said, yeah, put us on TV. We're new at this, but go ahead, Mr. Webb, put us on TV and let's see what we can do with our stories. And I think there's a whole generation of us who grew up watching Emergency. I'm not ashamed to say that when it's on Cozy TV, if I'm home at 12 o'clock, I'll still watch an old episode of it and compare that to what I know today, some 50 years later from that. And I think that all of us make a choice to become part of the fire service for a particular reason. Some it's the excitement. As we used to say in North Carolina, they get eat up with it. You get the red lights and sirens and air horns and go a little faster than you're supposed to. And they like that part. But I think most of us go in there because we're going to help somebody else in our community. But we have to temper that with knowing how to help that person the right way and making sure that we're keeping our colleagues safe at the same time. And as you said, fast water, there's nobody who'll disagree that fast water is the best thing that we can bring to any working fire scene. The faster we get it there, the better our chances are. But again, sometimes we react on our emotions, thank you very much, instead of on the facts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I'm sorry.
And that's easy. And that's easy to do. And I just wanted to get back to the command thing because you mentioned LA County. I grew up in LA County and had a scanner from the time I was like 8 years old, and we would chase fires. And one time we thought we were chasing a fire. I saw a task force of Crown Coach trucks going down the road, and I talked my mom into following them. And we followed it all the way to the set of Emergency. They were filming the Steel Inferno in Westwood.
Sure.
And we ended up hanging out on the set. I got autographs of from all of them, and it was fantastic. So, but listening to the scanner, I was always so struck, even as a kid, how calm and cool those commanders are at very large brush fires. I mean, flames 100 feet in the air, taking up homes, wiping out neighborhoods. And those commanders were calm, cool, and collected. And there was nothing like listening to them command one of those giant wildfires. And, that's something that, aside from Emergency, that really propelled me into wanting to be a command officer.
That's great. So as we're talking about command, for those of our listeners and viewers who may not know how Blue Card works, would you take a couple moments and explain them what the Blue Card system is all about, please?
Yep. It's an online training. It starts off as an online training program. So in the online training program, it's been refined down to about 30 hours. It's ACE accredited. So it's college accredited. It's accredited for college credits. So there's some things that we do with testing and quizzes and stuff as you go through the program that's mandated by ACE. So you can get those college credits for it if you so desire. And in some places, it's actually part of the community college system for a semester long class. So you take the 30-hour online. It walks you through the 8 functions of command right from Brunacini's book, and it gives you some examples of radio traffic and deployment. And one of the things that we get pushback on sometimes is there's a lot of Phoenix in there because we're using Phoenix pictures and Phoenix examples, but it can work in any system. It has worked in any system. Last week I was with Cobb County, Georgia, Avon, Ohio, West Metro, Colorado, some guys from Iowa from a smaller department. It works for all of them. So it doesn't matter the size of the department, just talking about deployment. So you go through the online program, and then after that, to get certified, you go to a certification lab where you're IC number 1, the first arriving company officer riding the right front seat of an engine or a truck, and then your IC number 2 on R5 building types, which is residential, multi-unit, commercial, strip mall, and big box. So you play the IC role 10 times throughout the simulations, and then you are certified after that. And that generally takes 16 hours. After that class, you're certified. And that's kind of like the practical skills part of EMT. I use that analogy a lot. Right. The online program is going through the class, and then the certification lab is the practical skills. And what that does, it gives a lot of sets and reps for folks, and keying the mic, getting used to doing size up and looking at the critical fire ground factors. The entire system is based on a strategic decision-making system that Bruno came up with, where we look at our critical fire ground factors, and there's many of them, and some are fixed and some are variable. After that, you come up with your risk management plan, which drives your strategy, and then your incident action plan. And once you kind of step through all of that, then you have a fire scene. Then you're being able to direct. And what we see is people arriving without being out of control, and it puts all of the command officers, whether you're a captain, lieutenant, crew lead, whatever you call it, and the chiefs who are outside in command when they assume command as IC number 2, on the same page. Everybody knows what each other's looking at. And then it gives us a language too when we're talking about our own jurisdictions, when we're talking about critical fire ground factors. So I have several high rises in my first due. I have a ton of new apartment buildings going up. And so when we sit and talk about those buildings, it's like, okay, what's critical fire ground factors if we have a fire on the 5th floor of this building? And it allows us to talk the same language and look at fires the same way. So after you're done with that, you're certified Blue Card IC for 3 years. There's continuing education. We're just talking about perishable skills. We require 36 hours every 3 years, just kind of like EMT once again. And then for you to recertify. So you go through a practical skills lab, and you're IC number 1 and IC number 2 again on all 5 building types. And what that does is just keeps everybody refreshed and in the system. Some folks go to hundreds of fires a year. Some folks go to 2 fires a year. So, wherever you kind of fall in the spectrum, it allows you to continue to have those touches when it comes to running a fire.
Right. And I think that's great. And you mentioned something very important about keeping that calm voice when you listen to these ICs on the radio. I'd say 99% really do keep that calm voice on the fire ground. And if you've not really heard something like that, listen to some of the scanners that are available online for cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA City, LA County, Denver, and listen to their dispatches when they have a major call. Coming from the Boston area, I listen to Boston quite a bit, and sometimes I'm amazed at they're at a 5-alarm, 7-alarm fire in Boston, and the dispatchers are talking like they're babysitting. They're wonderful. They just keep everybody calm. They give the ICs and the other officers the facts that they need for the fire ground. They dispatch or reroute apparatus, but they're calm, cool, and collected. And you can learn so much just from listening to people who say, this is the way I have to take care of my men and women in the field, because I'm sitting here behind this mic, but I'm the one who tells them where to go and how to get there and what the story is, and I got to be good for them. And like you said, when you have an IC who does that same thing and just keeps everybody calm on the fire ground, and tells people when to be quiet so that he or she can get their message out, and just to stop blabbing on the wrong channel. They're not trying to be a boss leader. They're trying to be a good leader to make sure that everybody hears the messages that have to be out there at the same time, without saying, oh, what did he say? What did she say? I didn't hear her say that. What did he say? We don't have time for that on the active fire ground. We have to have clear communication. That's one thing, as you said, going back to the 80s, coming up to today, that's one of the most important things you and I have seen, and many of our peers have seen over these 35, 40 years, is that it was kind of like a crapshoot back then. Whoever got there first, go ahead, you start doing what you want to do and what you think you have to do. We just can't operate that way anymore, especially with the hazards, the multi-hazard that we face today that we didn't face back then in the 70s and 80s. We know about the diseases we're facing today, the chemicals we're facing today. We need to all be on that same page when we're on that scene.
When I started about 20 years ago as chief of department, we didn't have shift commanders or anything like that. So I attended every fire back then. And when I would arrive at a fire that started out of control, meaning that there wasn't a good size up, There wasn't an initial incident action plan. The officers, were ill prepared, and I ill prepared them. I'm not casting aspersions on them. But when that started behind the 8 ball, it was hard to get out from behind the 8 ball. And when we can start with a captain or company officer, calm, cool, collected, knows what they're looking at, gives us a good size up and a decent initial radio report that kind of paints the pictures for everybody else coming into that scene, you notice that the anxiety level just goes down on those scenes. Sure. Pete Carroll has a book, Coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and he talks in that book, and I think it's very applicable to our service, about having supreme confidence. And he wants his players to have supreme confidence that they're going to win. And to me, I want our firefighters to have supreme confidence that we're going to look out for their safety. That's why I'm the eyes and ears on the outside of that building as IC number 2. And the other thing is we're going to train to win. So we're not going to put you into situations where you're going to potentially, completely lose control of the scene. And, that does happen occasionally. We're in dynamic environments when we're on a fire scene or other emergency rescue scenes. But if we can give our people as much confidence as possible while they're in IDLH, they've got all kinds of stuff going on around, and we're in this compressed time period. We're talking about a 12 or 15 minute work period for everybody, where they're doing a lot in those 12 or 15 minutes. They're gonna feel better about that. And I've talked to departments where they're good departments on the task level. They are good departments. They know their stuff, but unfortunately, every fire scene they get to, there's this out of control kind of mentality that happens with certain people. And then they start to feel like things are going to go bad. I had somebody on that department say, I felt like every fire we went to, something bad was going to happen. And it wasn't the task level people who were making them feel that way. It was just some of the radio traffic and the non-standardized language and some of the things that were going on with that. So, hopefully we're getting to a better place in the fire service where we are standardizing the way that we communicate. We're doing it very clearly, concisely, and calmly. And it was funny. Paul Coombs had an article out or a drawing out a couple of weeks ago where it was like, can you be too laid back as an IC? I don't know if you caught that one, but the IC was all, like had a martini in his hand and whatever, I don't think it was a martini, but he was kind of chilled out in the command post. And I always say, when I'm in the command post, I want my voice to sound like I care. I'm concerned about your radio traffic. I care about what you have going on, but I'm not too worried about what you have going on, because we've got, we're in control here, and we have that supreme confidence.
Right. I'll tell you, in my first department, volunteer department, we had a great chief and a great captain, and this was before the whole IC command structure was developed. But we were on, even in my first 7 months, I was on the nozzle 4 times. And they were terrific. They really did keep that fire ground. Whereas on my next department, it was totally different. Again, the IC structure was, I think, just coming out in the beginning of the early 80s, just being kind of formulated. I've been reading Chief Bruno's articles from the first one I got in Firehouse magazine, and try to read everything that he taught. I didn't know him. I just figured by reading the article, I just liked the person and knew the kind of leader he seemed to be. But we could have really used in that second department the IC command system, because it was a volunteer department and everybody was freelancing. The officers were freelancing, the deputy chiefs and assistant chiefs were freelancing, and there were just mixed signals on the fire ground, and it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right after 4 years of having great direction and great leadership. And I think that today, since the IC system is so well accepted, and yes, each department needs to fine tune a little bit for themselves. It's like, if you play any stringed instrument, if you keep it in a room, especially if you're here in South Florida where there's humidity and heat and AC, I have to tune my guitars, and one of them is a 12-string. I have to tune them probably once every couple of weeks, just because it affects that. And so we have to fine tune our operations based on where we are. You're in Minnetonka. Okay. I'm in South Florida. We're not going to necessarily fight fire the same way or face the same challenges necessarily, but the basics are still the same. If it's a fire, we want to put the wet stuff on the red stuff, but we want to do it as safely and as quickly as we can, no matter what.
And exactly what you're talking about, Steve, is there's 3 levels that we operate on. And this, the whole thing with Blue Card and Bruno's message isn't just about command. It's about all 3 levels that we operate on the fire ground. We have the task level, tactical, and strategic. The task level is the firefighters doing the work. They're forcing entry, moving hose lines, putting water on the fire, removing victims, throwing ladders, and they need to be great at those skills. On the tactical level, we need good company officers that can lead them, that can communicate, that can look out for their safety, keep their accountability, coach them on what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, make corrections as needed. And that also carries over into the firehouse, and safe vehicle operations, all of that stuff.
Sure.
Be a good coach. You're the infield coach when you're the tactical boss. And then the strategic boss is the IC outside, or the chief level, or whatever you want to call that. And none of those 3 levels can outperform the other. So in other words, if I'm a great incident commander, I'm the chief, I'm really good at what I do, I'm not going to be able to outperform poor practices being taken place on the interior of the building. Right. If they don't keep, one of the things, and this is a very simple thing, and I know probably a lot of the folks listening to this have encountered this, is penciling. So we get new firefighters, we go into a building and we see them start to pencil the water. And it's like, why are you doing that? Well, because in the flashover chamber and in the burn building, we had them do that. How many times when they went into a burn building with a Class A fire, we said, don't put the fire out. We need the next class to come in. When we're in the flashover chamber, it's like, don't knock the fire down all the way. We want it to flash over. So once they get into a real fire, because they practice, it's muscle memory, they start doing this. So if you've got a firefighter doing this and the tactical boss isn't telling them to open the nozzle and keep it open, the best IC in the world outside isn't going to be able to fix that. And the same thing goes. You can have a horrible IC on the outside making some very bad decisions, especially strategically, and a great interior company and boss and everything. But if that person isn't on the same page as the interior companies, it's all going to fall apart either. So what we try to say is have great training on every level, task, tactical, and strategic, and then bring it all together. And you're going to have a higher performing fire ground once that happens.
That's a great point. That's really well said. And I think, we always talk about teams, that we are a team. And no matter what apparatus you're assigned to, or you catch, whatever the case is, we're dedicated to work as a team to mitigate the emergency we're responding to. And if we have to work that way. And I think that the football analogy you gave was terrific, because you can't see, no matter the sport, you don't want to see anybody freelancing and not being part of the team to win that match, that game, whatever it is. And if they do try to freelance, it's going to be in the headlines the next day what the coach did. The same thing holds true for us as firefighters. We have to work as a team at those 3 levels. And if you're on one level and you're not on the other level, doesn't mean you're a bad person or you kick the dog. It just means that's where you are for now. And that, you can always aspire to improve and bring yourself up to the next level, et cetera. But to do so, you have to be willing to be part of the team that sets out to do the job together. And I think that's a great analogy that you provided there. All right, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break here, folks. And when we come back, we're going to talk with the chief about, and this is, when I saw this, it kind of surprised me, but it really means so much, even now what we're talking about, the all or nothing approach when it comes to strategy and tactics. Again, social media the last 2 to 3 years has been, pardon the pun, ablaze with comments shooting back and forth, not always polite, about this all or nothing when it comes to strategy and tactics. So we'll discuss that. If you're watching the video on YouTube, you're not going to see anything different during our break. And if you're listening to our podcast on a podcast audio platform, we'll be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hello, welcome back to this episode of 5-Alarm Task Force. My guest is Chief John Vance. We want to remind you, by the way, that our website at the number 5-alarmtaskforcecorp.org is still up and around. You can still make donations there. We have some big news coming out. We just ordered a bunch of new t-shirts in Army green, dark navy blue, and our traditional black one that we have. And you'll be able to earn a t-shirt with any contribution of $50 or more to our nonprofit foundation. As you know, we started this last October. Yes, in the midst of a pandemic, but it's a damn good thing we did, because we've been able to help firefighters and/or their surviving family members with nearly $2,000 worth of contributions that we have made since October. So the money is that you donate is always going to be spent where you tell us to. You want to go to the foundation, we'll go to the foundation. You want to go to operations, we'll go to operations. But you tell us where, and we're going to thank you for that donation. We'll let you know when those t-shirts come in, and they'll be available. So in the first part of our interview with Chief Vance, we talked about the blue card and some leadership issues, and all the way from not just leadership issues, I shouldn't say that, but how we look at leadership training for the fireground. I see the blue concept of the blue card training, very important. And again, you can take that course. We'll repeat it before we close off the podcast, where you can go to take that course as well. And especially if you have a community college in your area, you might be able to get the credits for it as well. It's set up that way, as the chief told us. And now in this segment, we're going to address, again, this is an issue that we've seen on social media quite a bit in the last couple of years. And that's the all or nothing approach when it comes to strategy and tactics. So Chief, if you please.
Well, one of the things that we're seeing just in society in general is these extreme positions. You always have to do this, or you can never do this. And what I'm looking for is firefighters that can think critically for themselves. So we give them enough information. So when the time comes, do we go offensive or defensive? Do we push inside? Do we rescue the person off the balcony? Whatever those decisions are, they're prepared to make the decisions, and there's always not a right choice. And we talk a lot in my place about different personality types, and people who, there's a lot of people who are black and white. They want a firm answer, and there's a lot of gray area when it comes to firefighting. So to really know how to fill in those gaps on making your decision, because it isn't always all or nothing. We can't always push in. We can't always get the search done right away. We can't always maybe get our water supply right away for the first engine. There's all these debates on social media. My suggestion is to turn off social media and let's sit around the kitchen table at the firehouse and figure this out. We recently went to clean cabs at our fire department. And I had one member, do the clean cabs, don't make grabs and all this other stuff. And I'm saying 90% of the time they're driving around in that engine, going to medical calls and other emergencies that they're not packing up for. I also have rescue trucks that the SCBAs were never in the cabs. And generally, they are turned out in about the same time frame. I mean, and I've also watched members reach into the cab and pull the SCBA out and put it on the outside. So if I can eliminate a risk by putting that SCBA in a high side rather than having it in the cab, that's going to help eliminate that risk that the firefighters can have. This is a risky job. I get it. We all talk about that all the time. But the minute we turn into, well, you're not willing to drive around with contaminated products in your cab, well, remember the oath that you took? Well, yeah, I do remember the oath that I took. And part of my responsibility as the fire chief is to make sure I'm taking care of the people who take care of the public. So if it's getting and by the way, there are two very aggressive urban fire departments out there. One, I don't think has ever had SCBAs in their cab. And Phoenix, in the mid-90s, they took the SCBAs out of the cab because firefighters kept falling out of the cab while they were getting turned out on the way to fires. So they fixed that problem by saying, you're going to stay seated and belted the whole time. I pride myself on getting like gear on pretty quick, including getting packed up as a chief officer in a smaller fire department. I still pack up when I go to fires. I can get that done out of the back of my buggy just about as fast as firefighters coming out of the cab. So to me, that's kind of a non-issue. And I don't know how I got down that rabbit hole, but it's the all or nothing that we're not going to be able to rescue people because you've got to go to a high side and put on your SCBA. You just need to practice putting on your SCBA. Or we can't spray the fire from the outside and make a quick hit on it before going interior because for some reason we're going to lose our man and women cards by doing that, and you're less of a firefighter for making a quick hit. One of the things at BLUE Card, we really got into the science for a while, and we're still into the science. We have a program called Safety where we put that information, but we started talking about things like not cutting a hole in the roof, not doing vertical ventilation. I can tell you right now, the Minnetonka Fire Department in the last 8 years has done vertical ventilation once. So I don't tell our people, we never do vertical ventilation. There's probably a time and a place for that, but we're going to put our energy into getting quick water on the fire. And if there's some reason like a hidden attic fire or, whatever, that we feel like we need to cut a hole in the roof, we're still trained to do that. We still have the tools to do it. We just don't generally do it. And when you start looking at maydays that occur from people that fall off or through roofs, it's kind of a fool's errand to me. And I'm not bashing any fire department that does it. I've sat around with big urban fire departments where they're like, we're going to go to the roof every time, all the time. That's what the truck company does. It's like, well, if that's the way you operate, I'm not bashing that, man. I'm not your fire department. But on the other hand, to say always and never, to me is a little bit dangerous because then it gets our folks in that mindset. And when we size up a building, we have to say whether or not we're going offensive or defensive, and whether or not we're going to do a search of that dwelling. And most of the time we're able to, at least in my fire department, most of the time we're able to. Sometimes the conditions that we're presented with, and because of our staffing level, we're not able to, at least at first, until we get some water on the fire. Does that mean we do that all the time? Absolutely not. We're going to try to get a search done as soon as possible because that's kind of why we're here. But on the other hand, I don't want to send people into an environment where I know people may already be dead. And when we start talking about the anatomy and physiology of a fire, and I point to things like the Cornell University study of 2008, I believe, where they said the trachea sears at 160 degrees. And we've got firefighters going into 1,000-degree environments. We're not really sizing up the risk, because that person is dead. Right. I get the occasionally I get chief, what about the person who's sheltered in place behind a door? And we're doing an excellent job telling people to close before they doze and keep their door shut. And if there is a fire, stay put until we come get you. Well, we can't go get them until we put the fire out. We've got to address the fire issue in order to get those people who are sheltered in place out. So I'm not on a primary search. I'm not opening doors most of the time. There might be an occasion to do that. So anyway, my thought on that is we need to have firefighters who are trained to think, that are trained to size up. They know conditions and the actions they need to take for those standard conditions that they face at a fire. And they're generally going to get standard outcomes out of that. And no fire is created equally. I understand that. Right. So really no tactic is created equally either.
Very true. And one of the things that we've concentrated on several of our podcasts with my dear friend and guest, Battalion Chief Andy Starnes, is the importance of using that tick. That officer coming out of that first due apparatus starts the first part of the 360 using that tick and making sure that they see where, as best they can, the seat of that fire is. Then start their assignments and then finish their 360 so they have now a full view of it, so that we do know what our chances are and what we can do. And do we have that 30 seconds, 40 seconds to do that tick reading and then hit the front door with a little bit of water just to cool that door down right behind it? And we see the proof positive on the tick readings. So if we can drop that temperature by 300 degrees, that's a big difference of putting people inside there to do the rescue, to facilitate a rescue, than them going in at 1200 degrees or that. And so that's part of that good concept of thinking, remembering, putting it into action, and doing. And those steps so that our firefighters stay safe, we stand hopefully a better chance to rescue anybody who might be trapped inside with a good outcome. As you said, though, no, every fire is different. We can't, as I've done with the former Deputy Chief Burns from Framingham, as he said, you could have 3 houses, 3 identical triple deckers next to each other. Each one has a fire one day later than the other. I'm not going to fight each one the same way. I'm going to read that fire when I get to that call, see what it is on house 1. The next night, oh, that fire is burning differently and everybody's out of the house. I have the whole family confirmed. The pets are out. Everything, there's no risk inside. I'm going to do that one differently. And the third one, that might be different too. He says, because that's my job as the deputy chief. I have to be able to read and know what's going on there so I can set up the tactics and strategy to fight that fire. And he says, and I can't assume that every fire is going to be identical, even if it's in 3 identical structures.
Right.
And what you just said lives up to that point.
And shout out to Andy Starnes, because I think Chief Starnes has done an excellent job with validating a lot of the information we've gotten from UL. And his, he's got some videos out there where shutting the door in 17 seconds cools the fire by 400 degrees. And the knockdown that we see in the temperature reduction for making that quick hit in that standard way that, the straight streamer, smooth bore, angled correctly without inducing a lot of air, does knock the crap out of the fire. So, those are good practices. And, just thinking, there was a Twitter debate. I don't know why I look at Twitter. I'm self-abusive in that way. And I love a lot of these guys who, there are guys who speak out against Blue Card or, a strong command system or more chief officers that I will send my people to their classes because I think they have a good message. I don't agree with them on everything. And I let my people know that. I say, hey, when you go to this class, you're going to hear this, this, and this. That's not really how we operate, but their message is great when it comes to how we search or how we move water or getting that hose line into the correct position. So I think there's room at the table for all of us in the fire service to bring our particular skills and perspectives in and just lose the all or nothing. So the debate that was going on was, somebody had a fire department that their policy was the first engine had to catch a hydrant every single time. And what we try to say at my department is once I have people in IDLH, I want an uninterrupted water supply because I only ride with 500 gallons on our engines. So that's kind of how we operate. But our hydrants are generally in most neighborhoods in my city about 300 feet apart. I personally, with a cop, have hand jacked to a hydrant before so we can get that uninterrupted water supply because the crew thought it was more important to get water on that fire quickly, right? I did not chew their ass. It was like that was if you thought that was a good move, then do it. I just want to make sure that we're connected to an uninterrupted water supply that we're going to have more than 500 gallons once we're in an interior firefight that looks like something beyond a room and contents fire. So you can't you can't say to the first engine, you always have, at least in my system, that you have to catch a water supply every single time because they might have some other critical factors they're looking at that is going to change their decision making.
Right. And again, everything is going to depend on your department, what kind of, what makes up your district. Do you have mostly rural? Do you have engines with 500, 750, 1,000 gallons on them? Or do you have an automatic tanker response on every possible working fire dispatch? Everything is different. My first department, we worked both. We had tankers, we had hydrants, we had dry hydrants that the chief was very big on. And we dug, my 4 years there, I dug a lot of those dry hydrants into streams and creeks that we had in our district. And at least twice in those 4 years, those gave us our water. Well, we were only running 3-inch hose at that time, 3-inch feeder lines, but it still gave us a good supply of water. We dumped them in a swimming pool. We put the flat skimmer in the swimming pool on one call because they just waiting for the tanker to come. We just needed more water than we had, and so the chief just said, "Let's go." Put the hose, dump it into the pool, and we'll take out 15,000 gallons out of the pool if we have to. It all depends where you are, what your makeup is. But again, as you said, we can't just say every tactic is black and white for every single department, and every department's going to be the same as every other department.
Right.
You know, we're as different as the stars in the sky at night. We all serve. You might be in a municipality in the Midwest, you might be on the West Coast, maybe the East Coast, maybe in the South, and you may be approximately the same size. Let's say you have 200,000 people. Doesn't mean you're going to fight fires the same way, because you don't. What's the mix of your district? You know, how much is commercial? How much is residential? How much is rural? All those factors play in to what our commanders know and have to consider for each call. That's not up to us, snot-nosed, belly-crawling nozzle jockeys. Our job is to just get the water where the commanders tell us to put the water. It's
Right.
their job to know the district, the structures, our capabilities, and then give us the command, you go do this and do this now and do it right. And that's the way we have to do it, and not be second guessing. You're a black hat, and there's nothing wrong with being a black hat. I was a black hat for my 8 years, and I loved it. And but that doesn't mean that it was a bad job. I loved being a black hat, but I had good officers above me, and that taught me and led me to where I got to be. And I think that if we say that, hey, and you mentioned it, let's just, instead of depending on hiding behind social media, if you have a question, bring it up to your kitchen table. Bring it up at your kitchen table at dinner or lunch. Say, Chief, let me ask you a question about this. Something just didn't strike. I saw this on social media, or what do you think about this idea? Could this, and then discuss it out in the open. And everybody can still offer their opinion. It doesn't mean, opinions are like armpits. We all have them. They all stink. So it doesn't mean anybody's better than anybody else. It just means let's flesh it out together, because we are a team together.
Well, and when we say always, we're always going to do it this way, or we're never going to do it this way. Our people build muscle memory from going to residential fires. I know my department, about 90% of what we do is a residential fire. If you reinforce the always with those residential fires, and we go to a commercial fire, they're going to bring that residential mentality with them in a larger building where there's generally no life safety issues most of the time. And they end up getting in trouble. Most of our Maydays, and certainly our multiple line of duty deaths in the fire service, the ones that have rocked the fire industry, are generally in commercial fires. And if you look at the size of the attack line, the air management that they were doing at those fires, they were bringing the residential mentality. So we need to be able to have our people pivot pretty quickly to those lower occasion, lower frequency, much higher risk when we're in a commercial building. I think you and me, Steve, give me a 1,500 square foot house every day. That's the bread and butter, man. That's what we learned in, and that's what I learned to fight fires in. And we do pretty good job as the American Fire Service in most of our places with addressing a residential fire. But it's when we get to the commercial fire and we're doing the same hose lay as we do at the residential, or we're running down to bells when we're on the end of the line and we're 200 feet in the building and now we need to get out. That's when we start to get in trouble. So when we start talking about risk management, that's some of what we're talking about is bringing that residential mentality to commercial structures where, certainly we've seen the multiple line of duty deaths. And those are hard fought too. When I look at every single NIOSH report that comes out, we owe it to those victims, their families, their comrades on that fire department, to read through that report and understand what happens and try not to repeat those mistakes. And by me saying mistakes, again, I'm not judging them as mistakes, but they're retrospect mistakes, right? They discovered, Charleston discovered that they needed large diameter hose to supply a pumper. If you talk to Dr. David Griffin, they discovered you can't bring a booster line into a commercial fire that's putting out 40 gallons of water per minute. They didn't know before that, but once we can learn that, then we owe it to our people and everybody who came before us to apply those lessons that were learned in a very hard fought manner.
Right. And again, you brought up NIOSH reports, and I think that if you're on a mailing list that lets you know when a NIOSH report comes out on a line of duty death, if you're an active firefighter, you really should feel obligated to read those reports yourself. You don't have to be an officer. Any firefighter should read those reports And again, as we talk about learning, learn from those reports, because again, as you said, we don't want to repeat those errors that may have cost a comrade their life. And we want to make sure that we go home safely from every job that we do, because we're continually looking to improve ourselves and learn more about the job.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Well, I know you have to run. I want to thank you, Chief. This has been great. And folks, we talked off air. We are going to have the Chief back when we start season 6. Can't believe season 6 already, in August. And we're going to be talking about the 5 reasons why firefighters fail and what their leaders can do about that. And I'll tell you what, with that as going to be the topic, if you have a question you would like me to ask to Chief Vance when he comes back in August, you can send the question to me at dalmatprod, D as in David, ALMATPROD @outlook.com. I'll put them in a folder and I'll have them ready for when we come back with the Chief in August. Chief, thank you so very much for taking time from, I know what is a very busy schedule, both in your department and with B Shifter, and working with the Bruno Foundation and the great people at the Brunicini family, how his sons have carried on the task. They do a great job. And it's good because their work keeps his memory in front of all of us who love the fire service, and how he taught us to be good firefighters.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Steve. If anyone wants to reach out to me, feel free to email me, johnvance@bshifter.com, or check out bshifter.com, the quarterly magazine, and you can check out all the articles there. And I'm up for, if you disagreed with something, go ahead and reach out and let's talk about it.
Right. That's the way it should be. All right. Well, Chief, again, many, many thanks. Stay safe and stay well. We look forward. We'll contact you with through mail, and we'll set up another conference in August. And folks, we'll be right back. If you're watching the video, this will be the end of the video portion of the show. If you're listening to the audio, we're going to be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. And again, our thanks to Chief John Vance for joining us today as we talked about the fire command training with Blue Card and the all or nothing approach when it comes to strategy and tactics. We'll be right back. Thank you. Bye-bye.